Hello there. This Ben here again with Studio on the Lake. Hey, this is a fun one. This is a commission piece, a small commission piece. This is a pine cone filler strip underneath a cabinet in a cabin for someone up here in the Northwoods. They put in a new dishwasher, and they didn't have a piece underneath. You can see the top of the counter there and the bottom of the dishwasher in the center. Now, this was done, they wanted it fairly simple, and it was an add-on, and I'll explain that in a minute. So I said, yeah, I can do that for you, and I quoted them a price. Well, they sent me the measurements that they needed to fill the slot, the outside measurements, and I said I can do that. So how did this come about? We've been talking about commissions, and here you can see I'm looking for the center of this piece. I ripped it dimensionally, and I just used a piece of old pine and cleaned up the front of it. And now I'm looking for the center. So old school way of finding the center. And I'm checking it. So I'm going to do the drawing on the work, and it's just going to be inset pine cones, and there's a nifty way of doing the border. Just use your finger as a measure, kind of like an old marking tool. And that's what's going to be inset, and you'll see what that is in a minute. So I have another commission that's a really big commission, and I carved 3 or 4 pieces that are samples, and they're just smaller pieces, and it's for some cabinetry work. On a commission that I've accepted, and we're waiting on stuff to come back for that. But I had the samples, and someone had stopped by, and I ran into them. They saw the samples, and they were like, "That's neat. What are those?" And I explained it to them, and they said, "Oh wow, can you? We just put a new dishwasher in the cabin, and it has this piece that's missing up above the top, and we were just going to put a piece of wood in there. Can you carve something with pine cones in there?" I sketched it out real quickly on a piece of paper, and they said, "Yep, that's exactly what we want." So that's what this is. So this was an add-on to a commission add-on. I did the samples for a commission, and I had those sitting there, and someone asked, "Well, what are those?" And I explained what they were. So without further ado, let's go forward. So I'm not at liberty to tell you what was charged for this. I think it turned out really pretty cool. And the folks that have it said it's just amazing that people will come into the kitchen and at first not notice it, and then they'll look around, and then they'll see that and go, "Oh wow, that is awesome. Where did that come from?" So it's possible, I guess, to get some more work from that. So I drew, it looks like 5 pine cones on either side, kind of oriented just a little bit off angle. So one would be elevated a little bit, one would be down, and you get the concept there. So then I went around with a saber burr and inset that probably, I'm guessing, between 3/8 and 1/4 inch. And now I'm outlining the pine cones on one side. So they start in the center, and then they go left and right. And then you won't see it until the end of this, but each of those, in between those, and then going to the rail part or the molding part, will be pine needles. Now, they did ask for just a simple, straight, somewhere in the middle finish, not a dark finish and not a light finish. They wanted something in the middle. And I did see the kitchen molding that's on the edge of the countertop, and we came fairly close to that color with my standard finish. So I did this silhouette of all of the pine cones, and then I rounded them over. One pine cone kind of under the next one, as they would be if you lined them all up. And now I'm drawing in the pine cone, the actual little leaves or cones, as the case may be, where the seeds are at. And you can see that one, this second one is going to be slightly under that one. And I'm just going to do 2 of them to show you here, and then you'll get to see the rest of them. You won't have to watch the whole painful process. But this was a fairly quick carve. I think I did this in about 2 hours, plus a little bit of time for the finish, and you'll get to see the finish in this one, something you don't normally get to see. So I drew those in. Now I have a bunch of pine cones around for reference. My wife collects pine cones, and I do too. So I've got some that are about this size, and I looked at them and kind of got a profile, and I have it sitting in the corner over there. The other thing is I've done a lot of pine cones over the years, and this is kind of a style that I do. So I'm at an angle, I'm cutting each of those individual leaves that open up, and we'll talk more about how to detail those leaves. This is relatively close to fish scales, although they're different sizes. They're graduated as they go down in a lot of cases, and they're very similar to feathers, so it's kind of the same concept. Now you see I undercut those kind of at an angle back towards what would be the base because they have a tendency to open up. And if you take a pine cone and stick it in water, it will close up tight. And then if you lay it on the counter or throw it in the oven for a little bit, it will open completely up like a flower. So I started with a saber burr, kind of a long taper, and now I've got a ruby bit in there, and that's a 3/32 in my Oz Plus handpiece, and I'm just kind of undercutting just a little bit more and then rounding out the tips. The goal in this is to leave it kind of rustic looking. I don't want these to be exactly identical to a template, and that's why I didn't do a template. I want them to look kind of natural. So after I undercut those with the ruby, you can see they're just kind of random shapes, relatively flowing in there. Now I've got a ball burr, and I'm going to round over the tips of those, or the back sides of those leaves. Now here's the neat thing. If you look at a pine cone leaf, if you take one of those little flakes and pull them out, you'll notice that the center of it kind of has a raised nib in it, and then the two outer edges are kind of recessed. And if you watch closely, you can kind of see that I'm doing both of the left and the right of those nibs, or those little leaves, but I'm leaving the center. I'm leaving a center portion raised, and you'll see a little bit more of that when I get in there and start doing the burning. So I don't want to leave those. I don't want to round those completely over, but I want to make them a little bit smooth. And if you look right in the center of that pine cone, you can see what I'm talking about. There's a little nib, almost like a feather nib, that goes down the center of each of those little leaves. And I'm just setting up the edge of these pine cones, and I found out that on a couple of the rest of them, I didn't actually do this. I just kind of carved down to that, and I'll remove most of this line that I'm putting in here later. Again, this is just a piece of number 2 pine. The wood was not that critical for what they put in, what they wanted put in there as the filler piece. And this is a neat addition to the hey, can you carve this for me in the commission world. When I talked about carving commissions, that was one of the things I said, is you can get a commission from someone just seeing your stuff. Now this was pretty simple because they already saw a sample, and they said, yeah, like this with and then I drew the 5 cones on the left, the 5 cones on the right, centered, and said, hey, does that work for you? And it was a simple, oh, that would be awesome. And like I said, they just love the piece, and I think it turned out pretty well for an ad hoc add-on. And this was not expected, and I really didn't have. I wasn't working on the other stuff, other commissions, so I had time to do this. So I'm going through and I'm burning each individual. I don't even know what to call those leaves on there. Now I'm coming back and refining them again, and once again I'm trying to leave the center portion of that, and I'm trying to make the each little leaf flow into the next one, and yet still be open, because the seeds are actually behind these little scale pockets. And that's a diamond ball burr in there. It's allowing me to do that. And you'll notice that I haven't played around with the edge. I'm trying to leave it a little rustic. It doesn't have a finished edge on it, and I'm going to leave that way. So we got a couple more steps to go in here to make these, but that's how they're starting to come out. There's a lot of ways you can get to this point. This just happens to be the way that I'm doing it. All right, so I've switched to a different. I run 2 burner pens on a Ultima from PJL Enterprise. It's got two slots for pens, and this is my shader pen. It's a larger one, and you can see that I'm putting the dark around the base of those individual leaves in there, and I'm leaving the center because in the center of those is where I've got that little nib that I want to stick up. And each of these will get this treatment, and then I will come over the burn marks with a little brass brush, and it'll take off any of the charcoal and just leave the highlight in there. And you can't see it, but I'm pushing pretty deep when I go up against the next one, like right there. I'm pushing deep down into there because I want that to be dark around the base. If you pull up a pine cone and look at it, you'll see the base is pretty dark. And you can see now where I'm leaving that little nib in the center. I'm not trying not to mark it. And this will get carved down around it, the background a little bit more, and turned into pine leaves. So that's kind of what it looks like when I get done with the burning portion of that. Here's my little standard brass brush that I use to clean off when I'm burning bird feathers and that sort of thing. And it's starting to look quite a bit like a pine cone. All right, so there you can see, I'm just going to give you a couple of quick sketches in there. There's the other three that I went ahead and carved on the right side. And there's the 1 and 2 in the center that I did for the demo for you there on the filming. And then there's the 5 on the left that are rounded over but not burned, and the rest of those 2 stages. So you can see where this is going. There is all of those burned. And the final work done in there, I got a little bit more detail. I go in and clean those up. Now, remember what I said about leaving those random? There is another style, and if you like that style, or the customer, more importantly, likes that style, I could have templated these and done each of them to a template, and they would look all the same. And to me, kind of boring. I like the random, and I like the choice that they did random. So now I've got a little ceramic bit in there, and I went through and I carved in the like a needle-like texture around each of those, and I went up to the edge of that random line where I set those down in there. So you can see there's different widths in there. And this is not sanded. I sand the front and I round over a couple of those, like the upper right there. You see it's a little ragged. But by and large, you can see the depth. And those are kind of representing needles, pine needles, and a bed of pine needles. And they're pretty difficult to do because they're kind of like hair. If you just take a lock of hair and stick it in there, it's difficult to do. And you can see now kind of why I went with a random freestyle pattern on this. It's just a lot more fun to carve a random pattern like this than it is to meticulously do what I'd call it static pine cone from a template. So it's going to get, this is amber shellac, probably my favorite finish in the world for pretty much everything. And you can stain before you put this on there. This will get 2 coats. You're only going to see 1 coat here. And then I put 1 coat on, I'll wipe it off. I let that dry. I'll take some steel wool over that, 00 or 4O steel wool. And then put a second coat on. And that second coat, I will go ahead and seal the edges in the back of this, just so moisture doesn't get into it. On this one, I didn't seal the front and the back because I know it's going to put another coat. Now, I want to make sure that that's distributed evenly down into the pine cones. The one thing I don't want with the shellac is I don't want any pooling It is an amber shellac, and it does have a little bit of a tint to it versus a clear shellac. You can get both those. Be careful if you when you get shellac from the store or from the hardware store. It does have an expiration date on it. If I'm doing a big piece, I'll get the actual flakes from the lac bug. They're like wings and parts and pieces, and then you dissolve them in alcohol. But there, it's still a little tacky. That's the first coat. I will put a second coat on that, and then run that with steel wool over that, and then I will put a antique furniture finisher's wax, which has a light dark tint, or sort of a minimum dark tint in it, and then I'll buff that out, and it comes up pretty nice. Gives you a nice, really smooth, easygoing finish. So this is not done. I've got the highlights to do. I put the shellac on there, and I thought a lot of the needles in the bed of needles around these was not reading well enough for me, and so I'm going to come back with a burning pen, and you can see this was just a piece of scrap wood that I had laying around. So I come back with a burning pen and put those extra lines in there, and you can kind of see that is where it went when it was installed, and there's what it looks like when it's done. So thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Studio on the Lake. Like, comment, as always. Thanks, Ben.